via like air pollutants. So more than 90% of dioxin exposure actually comes from food. So dioxins accumulate in the fat of animals in our food chain, and then we are exposed to them after eating either products that like meat products or by eating like different dairy products too. So some of these sources include freshwater fish, butter, cheese, hot dogs, ice cream, eggs, ocean fish. I'm gonna start over. I want to first start off this presentation with a disclaimer. This is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. I am a student at UAMS, not a representative of the agency that is named in the following slides. Hello, everyone. First off, I just want to thank you for coming to this meeting. My name is Kristen Stringfellow, and I'm an environmental specialist for the Arkansas Department of Health. Saline County is home for me. So this topic is not only something that I'm presenting to the people of Saline County, but it is also something that I'm personally affected by. Tonight, we will be discussing the effects of dioxin exposure here in Saline County. This is an outline of the topics that I will be touching on during my presentation. I first want to talk about what dioxin is. How is it a serious environmental pollutant in our community? What makes it toxic? I will then discuss the ways that we are exposed to dioxin. I want to share here the potential risks that would increase our exposure to. The effects of this environmental toxin is one of the most important topics that I want to present on. I want to explain this clearly so that we can do our best to keep each other as healthy as we can be. I would not be approaching you all at this meeting if I did not have some goals that we can work through and implement in our communities to reduce our exposure risks, and the ways that we as a whole can work with the Department of Health to keep our environment clean. Lastly, I will be opening up the floor for any questions that you all have for me. I want to know what your concerns are, what you want more information on, and if there's anything that I can do to help clarify the information that will be presented tonight. So what is dioxin? Dioxin is actually a group of toxic chemical compounds. I have listed here the three main families that these chemical compounds fall under. The first is polychlorinated dibenzopdioxins. These are otherwise known as PCDDs. These are released from burning plastics and from burning chlorinated waste. The second is polychlorinated dibenzofurans, otherwise known as PCDFs. These are released from municipal waste, which is just a fancy way of saying garbage, and from burning industrial waste too. The last main family of dioxins are the polychlorinated biphenyls, otherwise known as PCBs. These are usually released in the case of transformer fires and direct industrial spills. I'm only going into this much detail about the chemical compounds to simply be able to explain clearly where these compounds come from. In future slides, we will just group the chemical compounds together and refer to them all as dioxins. I did want to touch on this image really fast. So this image just shows how these compounds are really similar, but they do have that slight variation that makes them unique in their own way. And basically, it's just where the chlorine atoms are going to be found on the carbon rings. So moving forward, we understand that dioxin is a chemical compound that's commonly found in a lot of waste and produced by burning common garbage and combustible wood. This is not something that we are able to see with our naked eye. It's just a really small white crystalline needle compound. When it's in the air, it quickly disperses, and when it's in the ground, it's easily taken up into the groundwater and soil. I placed these two images here just to better communicate the type of compound that this is. One of these images is dioxin, and the other is actually powdered sugar. So I ask you all just to take a guess on which is which before I go to the next slide. So this top image is powdered sugar, but the bottom image is dioxin. And I show you this again just to express to you all how small the particles of dioxin are. Imagine spilling some powdered sugar in your backyard. After a few seconds, you will either have watched the particles fly away in the wind, or they would have seeped into the ground. This is exactly how dioxin gets into places that then we can be exposed to it. So how is it that we get exposed? We know that the particles are small, that we can't really see them, and we surely can't pick them out of things well once they are already there. Dioxin is not produced or used commercially in the United States, but there are some things that we do on a day-to-day basis that exposes us to those little carbon rings. At first, I just want to touch on backyard burning. This is a common source of dioxin, and this can be anything from your backyard barbecues and bonfires to just burning things like common household garbage, wood, coal, or oil. Next, I want to touch on bleaching. This isn't just your common household bleaching, but more so the industrial sized bleaching that happens like in plants that bleach paper. And that bleaching process can then create dioxins that leads to then air and water emissions. Cigarette smoke is also a common source of small amounts of dioxins. Next, I want to touch on drinking water and food supply. These are the two larger sources of dioxin, with food supply for sure being the largest. But drinking water is unique in the sense that it comes from a lot of different sources. So it can come from air emissions from waste plants, for example, that are burning to dispose of different types of waste. Those emissions can then get into our lakes and our nearby reservoirs that then cycle back into our drinking water. It can also be deposited from the air and then into the soils. And then it gets into the groundwater that then gets into various runoffs that cycle back into our drinking water and our household water. Or it can also just be directly discharged into the water that we drink from chemical factories just depositing their waste. The food supply is also very unique, and it can be like seafood that lives in contaminated water. It can be livestock that's fed with contaminated food or water. And it can also be in vegetables and fruit that are grown with contaminated water, or those can actually be exposed via the air as well. More than 90% of our dioxin exposure actually does come from food. Those dioxins accumulate in the fat of animals in our food chain. So these sources include things like freshwater fish, butter, cheese, hot dogs, ice cream, eggs, ocean fish, and then also like beef, chicken, and pork. I attached this slide here just to kind of give a broad overview about how we are exposed. So we can inhale it, have direct contact with it, or ingest it. But all of it comes back to that primary emission source, that primary combustible source of dioxin that then seeps into our soil, our food, our homes, and our environment. And then we are exposed to it. So dioxin, the main reason why I'm here, the main reason why I want to talk to you all is about this. I'm here to raise awareness of this topic so that I can keep you healthy. This is my home, and I want my friends and family safe and healthy. I want you all to know the effects that this can have directly on you so that we can work together to mitigate the rising levels of dioxin in Saline County. So some of the short-term health effects would be like skin lesions and altered liver functions. Some of the long-term effects are more varied. These can include weakened immune systems, nervous system defects, and effects on your endocrine and reproductive systems too. What's unique about dioxin is it can actually stay in the body for a really long time, up to like 7 to 11 years. I attached this image on the side here, and I just kind of want, it's a great image to show you how broad the effects can be on your just overall, every system in your entire body. So I kind of just want to touch on each of them just to kind of give you a more clear picture about these different health effects. So starting from the top with neurotoxicity, this can affect your mentality, your psychology, your motor function, and your executive function. So this can be anything from mood swings to not being able to recall or remember things that you had learned in the past. This can also affect your reproductive system. It can affect your ability to be fertile. It can affect your sexual maturity. So when you're going through menopause or when you're going through puberty, and it can also just affect reproductive hormones in general, affecting different menstrual cycles and things like that. Something that's really important to touch on is how harmful dioxin is in fetal development. It can have various birth outcomes. It can be really harmful to children that are developing, and it can just really be toxic. So if you're expecting, you should really monitor your levels even more closely than those who are not. It can also affect your endocrine system, and this can lead to diabetes. It can lead to thyroid problems. It can also lead to altered metabolism like of glucose and lipids too. And then we already kind of touched on that it can weaken your immune system, making you just more susceptible to autoimmune defects, and then also just more susceptible to getting different infections too. One thing that I really wanted to hit on was dioxin poisoning. This is really, really rare, but if you are exposed in like an industrial sense, if there's some type of chemical spill, if you're exposed to a high level in a short amount of time, it can lead to something called chloracne, which is in the images here. So basically, these are just pustules and blackheads and whiteheads and different nodules that have formed as a result of the dioxin exposure. Dioxin poisoning can also lead to other skin rashes and discoloration, but the chloracne is the more common symptom. So what does all of this look like in Saline County specifically? So our water comes from many different sources. It comes from lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, and reservoirs here in Saline County. And these levels the levels of potential contaminants are regularly monitored. And if you have any questions at all, you can actually call the water office and ask for the general manager, and they can tell you specifically about your water supply and like where it comes from in your neighborhood, where it comes from in your house specifically. Something that we have done here in Saline County is increase the testing frequencies as we found out that the dioxin exposure levels have increased. We've also fully educated our staff, and so they are expecting more personal questions about the individual water quality in your specific areas, and they're fully prepared to answer those specific questions. This has happened before in about 1997 in Jacksonville, Arkansas, and they actually found the elevated dioxin levels as they were studying fish and birds on the Washita River. They immediately contacted the EPA, and they were advised to continue their study because they were actually able to monitor dioxin levels better that way. So the city issued a warning to the residents about the content level of dioxin in the fish, and then other water sources were tested, water reservoirs were tested, and then water was only used if cleared by the EPA standard for being safe. Filtration was then increased at their water plant, as well as increased plans of regular testing of the water and of local fish. I put this information in here just to kind of parallel that this is the process that we are trying to emulate with all of you. We found that the dioxin levels were higher than they should be, and we're at the point now that we are issuing a warning to all the residents here at this meeting. And going forward, our plans are going to be to continue testing the water, to continue testing our water reservoirs, and to continue working very closely with the World Health Organization and with the EPA to make sure that our water quality is safe. So my goals specifically, the main goal that I had in talking to you all was to just educate you on what's going on in your community. We're working closely with so many groups of people to get the elevated dioxin levels more under control and to make sure that this does not happen again in the future, and also to prevent any harmful effects that this current issue could have on you all as a community. In 1997, Jacksonville, Arkansas, we already touched on this, but they experienced that similar situation. We're working really close with their management and prevention teams to learn how we can better filter our water, how we can better test local foods that come from local water sources, and decrease any potential additions to the dioxin levels that we already have, and also how to best educate you all as a community in the process. My next goal is to maintain the health of this community. On the next slide, I'm going to share with you all information that the World Health Organization has published that will decrease your risk of exposure. We are also increasing how often we test the water supplies at multiple water sources across the county. For those who are at increased risk or just want to get a checkup, the city is offering free physical exams and routine checkups so that we can catch any potential harmful effects that this increase has had. I will be passing out flyers that you all can also take to other members in the community. On the flyers, there's a list of 3 future meetings that we have scheduled, as well as my contact information. In the future meetings, we plan to update you all on not only the levels of dioxin, but also how the community is doing as a whole. I plan to also continue working with you all until we have these levels maintained. At our final meeting, we can discuss any questions that have come up in the process, as well as goals and plans for the future. This here is the slide that I mentioned before from the World Health Organization. As we kind of touched on previously, the dioxin levels are found in the fat of the animals. So if we consume low-fat dairy products, and if we trim the fat from the meat, this is a potential way that we can decrease our exposure to dioxin. Another way is that we can eat a very balanced diet of fruits and vegetables. And it's always great to eat a balanced diet of fruits and vegetables, but this is more so because that way you don't you're not isolating a vegetable, and that alone can increase your risk of dioxin exposure, but you're burying all the sources and all the places that your fruits and vegetables are coming from. And then also just really pay attention to any new rashes or symptoms that you feel. Does anyone have any questions? These here are all of the resources that I use to put this presentation together. And again, I just want to thank you all for coming to this meeting, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.